Suffering one of his bouts of claustrophobia, Dr. Kalchandambe felt as though he had been swallowed alive and was trapped now in a devil's gut. Deep inside the Stretchera complex, 3 stories below ground level, this room measured 40 feet by 20. The low ceiling was covered with a spongy, pebbly, yellowish soundproofing which gave the chamber a peculiar organic quality. Fluorescent tubes shed cold light over banks, computers, and overworked tables, laden with journals, charts, file, folders, scientific instruments, and 2 coffee mugs. Because it was important for the men who worked in the large room to have an unobstructed view of the smaller inner chamber at all times, 4 angled ceiling vents in both rooms bat the glass in a continuous flow of warm, dry air to prevent condensation and clouding. Currently, the system wasn't working, for 3/4 of the window was filmed with frost. Dr. Kalchandambe, a curly-haired man with a bushy mustache, stood at the window, blotting his damp hands on his medical whites and peering anxiously through one of the few frost patches of glass. Although he was struggling to decast of the seizure of claustrophobia that had gripped him, was trying to pretend that the organic-looking ceiling wasn't pressing low over his head, and that only open sky hung above him instead of 1,000 tons of concrete and steel rock. His own panic attack concerned him less that was happening behind the viewpoint. Dr. Aaron Zakaria, younger than Dombe, clean-shaven with straight brown hair, leaned over the computers reading the data that flowed across the screen. The temperature dropped 35 degrees in there during the past 3 minutes and a half. Chapter 27, Friday, January 2. For the most part, Reno streets were clean and dry spite of a recent snowfall. Through occasional patches of black ice waited of the unwary motorists, Elliot Stryker drove cautiously and kept his eyes on the road. They had traveled an additional 1/4 of a mile before Luciano Bellucaste's home and place of business came into sight on the left. Beyond a black-bordered sign that grandiosely stated the nature of the service that he provided. Funeral director, grade councilor, it was an immense pseudo-colonial house perched prominently on top of a hill, on a 3 or 4 acre property and conveniently next door to a large, non-denominational cemetery. The long driveway curved up and to the right, like a weed of a black funeral bunting grape across the rising snow, shrouded lawn, stone posts, and softly glowing electric lamps. It was marked the way of the front door and warm light radiated from several first-floor windows. Chapter 28. Kurt Henson, George Alexander's, the right-hand man dosed the right flight from Las Vegas to Reno. They were in a 10-passenger jet that belonged to the network, and the aircraft took a battering from the high-altitude winds that blow across its assigned flight corridor. Henson, a powerfully built man with white blonde hair and cut yellow eyes, was afraid of flying. He could only manage to get on the plane after he had medicated himself. As usual, he needed off minutes after the aircraft lifted from the runway. George Alexander was the only other passenger. He considered the requisitioning of this executive jet to be one of his most important accomplishments. In the 3 years that he had been chief of the Nevada Bureau of the network, although he spent more than half of his time working in his Las Vegas office, he often had reason to fly to far joints at the spur of the moment. Reno, Elko, even out of the states, Texas, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. During the first year, he'd taken commercial flights for rented the services of a trustworthy private pilot who could fly conventional twin-engine. Alexander's producer had managed to pry out of the network's budget. Chapter 29. In Tina's dream, Danny was at the far end of a long tunnel. He was in chains, sitting in the center of a small, well-lighted cavern, but the passageway that led him to his shadowy and reek of danger. Danny called to her again and again. begging her to save him before the roof of his underground prison caved in and buried him alive. She started down the tunnel toward him, determined to get him out of there, and something reached of her from a narrow cliff in the wall. She was peripherally aware of a soft, far-like glow from beyond the cliff, and a mysterious figure she halted against the reddish backdrop. She turned and she was looking at the grinning face of death as if he were praying out of her from the bowels of the hell. The crimson eyes, the shriveled flesh, the lace work of maggots in his cheeks. She cried out, but then she saw that death could not quite deter her. The hole in the wall was not wide enough for him to step through. Into her passageway, he could only thrust one arm at her, and his long bony finger were in an inch or two short of her. Danny began calling again, and she continued down the dusky tunnel toward him. A dozen times she passed chinks in the wall, and that glared out at her from every one of these apertures, seemed and cursed and argued at her, but none of the holes was large enough to allow him through. She reached Danny, and when she touched him, the chains fell magically away from his arms and legs. Chapter 30. Two sporting goods stores and two gun shops were within easy walking distance of the hotel. The first sporting goods dealer did not carry the moths, and although the second usually had them, it was currently sold out. Elliot and Tina found what they needed if the one gun shop's a set of 12 wilderness. The moths of the sheriffs designed with backpackers and hundreds in mind. The set in a lifetime laterite covered case and sold for $100.
Dad, I'm pregnant.
Oops. Sometimes life's more than a 3-minute conversation. Talk for up to 60 minutes, pay for just 3 with Vodafone.
And now let's proceed to the final chapter, Chapter 4.
Billy Sandstone was in his late 30s, as small and lean as a jockey, and his watchboard seemed to be neatness. His shoes shone like black mirrors. The creases in his slacks were as sharp as blades, and his blue sport shirt was starched. Crisp. His hair was razor cut, and he groomed his mustache so meticulously that it almost appeared to have been painted in his upper lip. Billy's dining room was neat too. The table, the chairs, the cornisa, and the hutch all glowed warm. Because of the prodigious amount of furniture polish that had been buffed into the wood, even if more vigor that he had employed when shining his dazzling shoes. Fresh roses were arranged in a crystal vases in the center of the table, and clean lines of bright, gleamed and exquisite glass. The deciduous tree stripe of Billy appeared to be charred, as this particular winter had been more severe than others, as a cataclysmic as a flood. The evergreen pine spurs sheer tamarack were flocked with snow. A breeze windspealed over the jagged horizon under a low of menacing sky snapping high art. Flurries of snow against the windshield of the Explorer. Tina was in awe of an aunt disquieted by the stately forest through them as they drove north by narrowing country roads. Even if she had not known that these deep woodlands hardwood squeezed about Danny and the deaths of the other scouts, she would have not them mysterious and inevitably primitive them. In the rectangular room, 3 stories underground, computers hemmed on a murmur. Dr. Carlton Dombey, who had come on duty 20 minutes ago, sat at one of the tables against the north wall. He was studying a set of electric belograms and digitally enhanced sonograms and X-rays. The spot doesn't have all the spectrographic characteristics of a tumor. Just like the heating system in that isolation chamber is functioning properly. Zachariah said, still peering through the test results, stroking his mustache with hand. Don't be sad. Listen to this. The growth rate of the parietal spot is directly proportional to the number of injections by the boys being given. The oil and gravel trade led deep into the forest. It was remarkably free of fruits and chockholes for most of its length, although the explorers cropped about bottom a few times when the track took sudden, sharp dips. The trees hung lower still until at last. The ice-crusted evergreen boughs frequently scraped across the roof of the explorer with a sound like fingernails being down a blackboard. They passed a few signs that told them the lane they were using was kept for open, exclusive benefit of federal and state wildlife officers and researchers. Only authorized vehicles were permitted. The signs warned. He was driving at only 10 miles an hour, but she gave him so little warning that he passed the turnoff. With glossy photographs of Christina Evans and Elliot Stryker, George Alexander's men circulated through the hotels in downtown Rome, talking with desk clerks, bellmen, and other employees. At 4:30, they obtained a strong positive identification for a maid of Paris. In room 918, the network operatives discovered a cheap suitcase, dirty clothes, toothbrushes, various toiletry items, and 11 mops in a leatherette case, which is Elliot and Tina in their haste and queerness evenly overlooked. Alexander was informed of the discovery at 5:05. By 5:40, everything was striker and a woman had left in the hotel room was brought the Alexander's office.